This is Democracy Now! We're on the road in Washington, D.C.
The first presidential debate of this election is happening literally miles from both Columbine High School in Aurora, Colorado, two of the worst shootings in our country's history. This is a debate about domestic policy. If there ever is a time to pose a question about gun policy in America to our candidates for president of this country, then this debate that's happening on Wednesday is the time to do it.
As President Obama and Mitt Romney prepare for Wednesday's debate in Denver, survivors of recent shooting massacres are urging moderator Jim Lehrer to ask the candidates about gun violence. We'll speak with Colin Goddard. He survived the 2007 shooting at Virginia Tech, and to poet and Virginia Tech professor Nikki Giovanni, who taught the shooter in her poetry class.
You're running for president, then tell me what you're going to do about it. Because if you're not concerned about gun violence, what in the world are you concerned about?
But first, as the U.S. death toll in Afghanistan tops 2,000, we speak with Phyllis Bennis about America's longest war. All that and more coming up. Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Iran's currency has hit an all-time low amidst a worsening financial crisis brought upon by U.S.-led sanctions. On Monday, the Iranian rial dropped more than 15% to its lowest point yet against the dollar, capping a three-month period that's seen its overall value drop 57%. The prices of basic food staples in Iran are said to be rising by the day since a new round of Western sanctions took effect in July. At a public event in Washington Monday, Thomas Pickering, a former U.S. ambassador to the UN and Undersecretary of State, criticized the sanctions, saying, quote, "We issue licenses for sales of food and medicine to Iran, but it is not legal for them to pay for it." Speaking, meanwhile, to the Council on Foreign Relations in New York, Iranian Foreign Minister Ali Akbar Salehi said his government hasn't wavered from its renouncement of nuclear weapons.
If any country, including Iran, uses weapons of mass destruction, that is the end of the validity, eligibility, legality, whatever you name it, of that government. Weapons of mass destruction, as we said, is against humanity. It's something that is not at all acceptable.
The British, French, and German governments are expected to push for a further tightening of sanctions by the end of the month. Israel, meanwhile, is drawing little attention for refusing to take part in an upcoming conference on the establishment of a nuclear-free Middle East. The gathering, scheduled for December in Finland under the auspices of the International Atomic Energy Agency. But at a recent meeting, Israeli nuclear chief Shaul Horev told diplomats that any deal for a nuclear-free zone under the UN would amount to, quote, external coercion, as opposed to local initiative. The Obama administration is reportedly considering whether to begin unilateral military strikes on alleged al-Qaeda targets in North Africa. The Washington Post reports the deliberations center around concern over al-Qaeda gains in Mali, as well as its acquisition of weapons from post-Gaddafi Libya. As part of its efforts in North Africa, the U.S. has launched secret intelligence operations, including the use of civilian aircraft to conduct surveillance over the Sahara Desert and the Sahel region. New figures show September was Iraq's deadliest month in more than 2 years. At least 365 people were killed in nationwide violence last month, more than half of them civilians. Nearly 700 people were wounded. At least 3 people were killed in a U.S. drone strike Monday in the Pakistani region of North Waziristan. The identities of the victims remain unknown. The strikes come as the anti-drone activists from Pakistan and around the world are gathering in Islamabad ahead of a 2-day march this weekend. In Bahrain, 5 of 9 convicted medics have been arrested in a series of pre-dawn raids. The arrests come 1 day after Bahrain's highest court upheld their sentences for treating demonstrators during anti-government protests last year. The longest sentence went to the former senior medic at Bahrain's top hospital, Ali Al-Khari, who was given 5 years in prison. Just hours before he was arrested, Dr. Al-Khari told reporters he was unsure when he would be detained.
In regards to our reaction to the verdicts today, by reinforcing the appeals court verdict, we were expecting that, and we know that we are still targeted as medics for our role in the pro-democracy movement. I met with some today, and they expected the same, that there will be reinforcement for the verdict, and they believe also that they are innocent and they did no misdoing or wrongdoing.
That was Bahraini medic Ali Al-Akri speaking just hours before his arrest. He now faces up to 5 years behind bars. New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman has filed a lawsuit against J.P. Morgan Chase for alleged fraud in mortgage-backed securities issued by Bear Stearns. Schneiderman says investors were defrauded around $20 billion in buying packages of pooled mortgages and loans. Bear Stearns issued the securities before being acquired by J.P. Morgan Chase during the financial crisis of 2008. The case is the first against a major U.S. bank to come out of the Residential Mortgage-Backed Securities Working Group, a White House-backed task force launched earlier this year to probe fraud in mortgage-backed securities. The credit card giant American Express has agreed to pay $112.5 million to settle allegations of abusive debt collection and late fee charges, as well as deceptive marketing. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau says American Express customers were illegally charged late fees based on a percentage of their debt, while others were given the impression partial payment would result in the forgiveness of their remaining balance. The company will refund $85 million to customers and pay another $27.5 million to government agencies. President Obama and Republican challenger Mitt Romney are campaigning in Colorado ahead of their first presidential debate Wednesday night in Denver. On Monday, Romney told supporters he looks forward to make his case.
Conversation with the American people that will span almost an entire month. We'll get to describe our respective views, and I believe the people of Colorado will choose a better way forward for our country. We can't afford 4 more years like the last 4 years.
Tune in to Democracy Now! On Wednesday when we host a special expanded presidential debate in the evening, pausing after the questions to candidates Obama and Romney to include equal time responses from third-party presidential candidates Jill Stein of the Green Party and Rocky Anderson of the Justice Party. That's Wednesday night. We'll be beginning our broadcast at 8:30 Eastern Standard Time. The Republican National Committee has reportedly ended its bid to register new voters in key states ahead of the November election after a company hired to run its registration effort was accused of systematic voter fraud. Election officials in at least 9 Florida counties have reported questionable voter registration forms submitted by the right-wing firm Strategic Allied Consulting. The Republican National Committee has canceled its contract with the firm, which was reportedly the only vendor it had hired to register voters. Despite a reported history of similar voting scandals, Republicans had paid firm millions of dollars, including more than $1.3 million in Florida. Police in riot gear arrested at least 17 protesters who sat down in the middle of a road leading to a Walmart warehouse in Elwood, Illinois, Monday, in a bid to support striking workers. The arrests were made after some 600 people sang, chanted, and marched toward the warehouse, which is run by a contractor but supplies Walmart stores. Warehouse workers went on strike more than 2 weeks ago amidst allegations of sexual harassment, dangerous working conditions, unpaid wages, and retaliation against organizers. Managers reportedly fired several leaders and threatened others after they delivered a petition. The strike in Illinois follows another strike by some 36 workers at a Walmart supply warehouse in Southern California who've also pushed for fairer workplace conditions. Demonstrators rallied here in Washington, D.C. Monday to mark the first anniversary of D.C.'s Occupy movement. Occupy protesters camped out in D.C.'s Freedom Plaza after the initial Occupy Wall Street protests sprung up in Manhattan's Zuccotti Park last fall. On Monday, Occupy protesters marched through the streets, blocked traffic, and protested at the offices of lobbyists and corporations. And the scientist, activist, and former presidential candidate Dr. Barry Commoner has died at the age of 95. Dr. Commoner was an early advocate of environmental awareness and ran for president in 1980 to spread his ecological message. In a statement, the consumer advocate Ralph Nader said, quote, Dr. Barry Commoner should be considered the greatest environmentalist of the 20th century. His great work is reflected in his many campaigns that succeeded and in raising public consciousness to the silent violence of toxic pollution. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We're